Hello and welcome to this edition of Türkiye Talks. We are going to talk about Turkey and Israel. I am joined by Kadir, Üstün from SETA from Washington. Kadir, hello, how are you?
Good, Bora. How are you doing?
Fine. A lot of developments happening in and around of Turkey, and recently, actually, we are more interested in what's going on, especially in relations between Turkey and Israel. We are going to talk about that. Why did Turkey? Why has Turkey turned to Israel recently after President Erdogan? He in a way declared that he's expecting a visit, high-level visit from Israel. And also, when we look at Israeli media, we see lots of columns, opinions, and news about this possible meeting, possible visit. Let me give you the first opening statement from you. What do you think? Why do you think Turkey is now in a way of, maybe if we can say, normalization with Israel? What is the motive behind it?
Bora, as you mentioned, in recent weeks, President Erdogan talked twice, I believe. He mentioned that there would be a new chapter in Turkey-Israel relations. I think there's a broader picture here in terms of regional realignments that we've discussed in our previous episodes of this Times of Türkiye. Turkey has been developing relations with the United Arab Emirates. Turkey, talked about normalizing and with Egypt to some extent. At least some diplomatic, initiatives were done or meetings were conducted on that front. And we are, I think, at a stage where Arab Spring has, evolved into several civil wars in the region, and it brought countries against one another. It created a lot of tensions and military operations, etc. We are now at a point that the region, with especially the withdrawal of U.S. leadership, I don't mean by that withdrawal of U.S. troops, but U.S. willing to do less in the Middle East. We are looking at these actors sort of trying to readjust and realign themselves and talk to each other more. Especially, this region has been sort of impacted by a lot of Russian activities, right? From Libya to Syria to South Caucasus. And of course, Biden administration is trying to strike a deal with Iran, nuclear deal with Iran. And once that happens, that will have repercussions for the region as well. So anticipating these changes and then coming to terms with changes in the region, with the kind of, the end of Arab Spring in many ways, I think we are seeing these moves. So Turkey recently, developed more sort of exchanged visits with United Arab Emirates, and as part of that, I think now Israel is going to be, perhaps Israeli president is reportedly going to pay a visit to Turkey, and this could be the start of a new era. And there are many topics we will discuss in the next half an hour or so with you. But I'm curious about your sort of observations as well, how it's presented in the Turkish media, how it's perceived in the Turkish media, because when we look at the Israeli press, they are somewhat, positive about this, but they're also skeptic about, Turkey's approach, Turkey's intentions, as you will. We can speculate, but I wanted to know what your take on the sort of Turkish media's approach.
Yeah, Turkish media we have two camps actually. When we look at one side of the story, actually it's very ideological and doesn't go beyond ideological and domestic debate. On the other side, the media close to the government, they are more interested in Turkey's new foreign policy, if we would like to call it as a new policy. So my personal opinion, actually, I mean, when we look at President Erdogan's 20-year of record with Turkish-Israeli relations, from the beginning to this day, I think he's very pragmatic and very rational. Because if you remember when he took over the first years of the AK Party government, we have seen that Turkey tried to act as a mediator, tried to find a way between Israelis and Palestinians. President Erdogan, when he was prime minister, he even accepted to meet with Ariel Sharon, who is very actually anti-Palestinian, and also he was a hardliner, and he was behind Israeli hardline policy early in 2000s. But despite this, Erdogan's approach was to, find a common way, maybe decrease the tension. So after Sharon, if you remember, Prime Minister also tried to find a way between Israel and Syria in 2007-8. I even remember President Abbas, he came to Turkey, and with Israeli president, they spoke in Turkish parliament. So Turkey's approach was always constructive, and despite the portrayal of Turkey as an ideological actor in Israel-Palestinian question, it's not reflecting the truth. When things started to break down, if you remember, it was in 2009 when Erdogan was trying to find a way between Israel and Syria. A few days after the meeting, Israel started bombing Gaza, and it was the first breach of trust between the two sides. So, as you mentioned, Israeli media, they talk about suspicions, they talk about how we can trust Turkey. Actually, it was the Israeli side who break this cycle, this trust, and things, develop in a negative way in 2010s with the Arab Spring. What happened in Gaza, Israeli policies in Palestinian territories. Yeah. So we all remember Netanyahu. He was very tough on Palestinians. He kept building, settlements. So I think this was the problem. Now I think with the new government in Israel, lacking the luggage of Netanyahu, negative memories. So I think there's a chance for a new start. So this is my personal opinion. When it comes to Turkish media, I think most people are very interested in what's going to happen. Especially some people in Turkish media, they think that this will be an opportunity for Turkey to develop its relations with the rest of the countries, especially in the West. So this can be an opportunity, but also there are challenges. Maybe you would like to talk about it. I don't know.
Sure. Well, as you mentioned, I described the latest situation in the region, but as you mentioned, Turkey under President Erdogan has been pragmatic in its relations with Israel, and it tried to play the role of a mediator. And Operation Cast Lead in 2009, when Turkey thought that they were on the cusp of striking an agreement between Israel and Syria, that at that time that would be historic. All of a sudden, Israel started that operation in Gaza. Things have gotten much worse after that, and Turkey's, the 2010 May 31st, I believe it was, the flotilla incident, and ever since relations have not been put back on track. There was a period where U.S. political leaders tried to bring the two sides and etc. But during that incident, many Turkish citizens lost their lives, and that was, I don't want to relitigate, go back to history too much, but ever since then, Turkey and Israel, they have continued their economic relations, and lately it has even increased. Turkish, Israeli tourists do come to Turkey all the time, but at the political level, at the diplomatic level, relations have remained downgraded, despite the fact that in the Syrian civil war, Turkey has troops on the ground. It controls several regions in the northern Syria, and Israel recently basically took over the Golan Heights. So both countries have a stake in what happens in Syria. But that history since the 2010s have been so enmeshed with sort of tensions and serious disagreements that it has been difficult to resolve the issues. I do agree with you about the Netanyahu effect. He, as a politician, he has a sort of larger than life persona, and he's very influential in U.S. politics as well. He has been, so his impact on the perception of Turkey has been also strong. So when now Netanyahu is not in power, this could be a new start, sort of perhaps a good time to upgrade the relations back to where it was. Of course, like you mentioned, Palestine angle is always important for Turkey, not just for the AK party governments. We know from the 90s and even before, Turkish public has been very sensitive to the Palestinians' plight, and whenever there is a sort of what is perceived in Turkey as heavy-handed treatment of Palestinians, it makes the news. It makes the top news. You would know. You're the journalist. I'm sure you can give so many examples of that. So that that pushes the button in Turkey, and any government will find it very difficult to maintain strong relations or good relations, or even working relations with Israel when there's a situation in Gaza, and then there's the human rights daily issues in Israel, and so Amnesty just came out with a report that really talked about Israel as an apartheid state. So those things always will make Turkey's position difficult. It will make normalization harder, and but nevertheless, right, there are so many different dynamics in the region, in the Middle East, that both countries have interests in. They have pretty much no choice but to talk more and sort of try to see where they are at with respect to their national interests. Sort of before starting our conversation today, Bora, you and I both, were discussing the natural gas issue. Why don't you sort of explain how Turkey sees that issue, if you like, unless you have something else to add to what I was saying?
Yeah, I mean, I about energy, I try to frame it with the past Turkish-Israeli relations. I mean, in 1990s, the backbone of the Turkish-Israeli relations was military, security, and intelligence. It was a time of peace process, 1990s. Israelis were talking to Palestinians and other Arab countries. So for Turkey, it was easier to approach Israel. Both countries needed each other in terms of military and security. Syria was a common threat. They were hosting PKK, and Israel had its own problems with Syrians during the time of Hafez Assad. I think it's over. It's clearly over. As you mentioned, the flotilla incident, Turkey lost 10 people, in that 10 civilians, 10 aid workers actually. And both countries had different interests in 20s after the peace process actually collapsed. And I'd like to remind our audience that you said it's not only AK party government, but in the past, when I was a journalist in year 2000, when the Intifada, the Palestinian uprising, started in late 2000, at that time, the prime minister was a left-leaning party leader, Bülent Ecevit, and he accused Israel using genocide-like attitude, policies. So it's a general attitude of Turkish people, whether they are socialist or nationalist, whatever. So it's an important issue, and I think a relationship based on military security is not possible. It's over. Now, I believe the backbone of the relations can be energy-related issues. It can provide a solid ground to rebuild a relationship between Turkey and Israel, because both countries can work on that, can cooperate, and it doesn't affect the other issue, which is a hot issue for any government for Turkey today, in the past, or in the future, the Palestinian problem. Because when Palestinians suffer, you cannot cooperate in military with any country, with Israel especially. But energy is different. So both countries can compartmentalize their relations. They can work on business, tourism, energy, but not on military section. So I think it's a good start. And also, when we look at the situation of Israel, they have sources in the Mediterranean Sea, and the borders are not clear. So energy business need a stabilized environment, secure environment to operate. I think Turkish-Israeli partnership or cooperation, whatever we say, can help to stabilize the region, because as long as you have Cyprus issue, how can you start digging or producing energy? You have Syria issue, if it is not resolved, or Lebanese issue, how can you start, or Gaza, how can you operate your gas or other energy network there? So I think energy can be a backbone. Also, maybe both countries can work on how to find a way, legitimize or legalize who is getting what in Mediterranean. I think this can be a good start and solid ground for this relationship. I don't know what's your take on that.
No, I agree. It's especially natural gas finds near Israel. Those were supposed to be really big finds, and sort of those resources could be exported to Europe. But because the relations between the two countries, Israel and Turkey, were still bad, or at least just restricted to certain economic areas, that wasn't possible. So Israel talked about working with Greece and sort of Cyprus to even, have pipelines under the Mediterranean Sea, which is a very, very costly project. And given the sort of low price of natural gas, that project was not even feasible financially. And recently, United States pulled its support from that project altogether. So the most logical sort of export point is Turkey. Through Turkey, Turkey has existing pipelines. Israeli gas could be brought there and sent to Europe, theoretically at least, and that would be much cheaper and a lot less costlier for a project. So that works for the benefits of both countries at the energy cooperation level. I agree. It's hard, sort of in Syria when both countries are feeling security threats. I don't know, like, if any cooperation could have happened, but military cooperation is very, very difficult for the dynamics you just explained. So energy is one obvious sort of address to go to in terms of sort of strengthening the Turkish-Israeli relations, which would have the kind of stability effect that you're talking about. Because Turkey in the Libyan civil war, Turkey helped the UN supported government in Tripoli, and then it also announced this military demarcation, what was it? Turkey and Libya signed this maritime delimitation deal, which essentially makes any kind of Israeli or Egyptian sort of projects to go to Europe, bring their gas to Europe, more complicated if Turkey would not agree to it. And Turkey sent out drilling ships around Cyprus. Cyprus is a whole other complicated matter. The bottom line is, I agree with you that for energy exports to Europe, you need cooperation. You need regional countries, especially a country like Turkey, to sort of help facilitate that. Otherwise, it just won't happen, and you will have more tensions in the Eastern Mediterranean. And we saw that. We saw that last year. Even France, it involved itself and started a shouting match with President Erdogan. Macron tried to play the role of a sort of older brother for Greece and Cyprus, and because Cyprus is an EU member now, but that kind of effort to create a bloc against Turkey was not received well in Turkey, and it was met with Turkish drilling ships sailing out, and then Turkey asserting its rights on the sort of natural gas resources in the Eastern Mediterranean. So that nobody ultimately wins by that. Turkey feels strong about some of these issues, but ultimately some cooperation is needed if those resources are going to be utilized and benefit countries. From the Israeli perspective, I think that is helpful also, but they will probably won't want to jeopardize their good relations with Greece, but it's not an either or situation. Like, it doesn't mean because Turkey and Israel might have better relations, it doesn't mean that Israel has to give up its good relations with Greece, because Turkey has largely good relations with Greece, except for certain issues, right? They're neighbors. And so I think that is one almost sure bet, safe bet to start in terms of cooperation. But of course, like we mentioned, JCPOA, Iran deal. Maybe you can talk about, I mean, something that wasn't very well understood in Washington is, you know, how Obama's efforts to make a deal with Iran and quote unquote, bring a balance between Shiites and Sunnis, that perspective was really not well received in Turkey, right? Can you maybe talk about that? Iran felt really, on the one hand, Turkey supported the JCPOA, and it still does. They don't want increased tensions and military conflict. But at the same time, that kind of normalization or some sort of diplomatic agreement with Iran, it shouldn't create a situation where Iran is more emboldened in the region. That's kind of what I gathered. But you can talk more about that, how they saw Iran after the JCPOA, their activities, especially in Syria and other places.
I think maybe we should explain Turkey's foreign policy, regional policy. Turkey is for the stability of the region. Turkey supports territorial integrity of its neighbors because Turkey suffered a lot due to the Iraqi war in 1991, later 2003, the civil war in Syria. They had consequences and they brought problems to Turkey, economic problems, migration, and many other issues related to security issues. So on the first thing that we should know, Turkey wants stability, but at the same time, Turkey doesn't want any country to dominate the region. And Iran is a country which tries to extend its power, as we have seen what they have done in Iraq, what they have done in Syria, Yemen. So Iranians tried to extend their impact, their power, projected power. And this is a problem for Turkey. Remember what happened in Syria, in northern part of Syria. Turkey had to deal with Iranian-supported militias in Idlib, in other parts of the country. Also, Turkey and Iran are at the opposite sides in the Syrian issue. Turkey supported and supports actually the opposition, while Iran worked hard and spent billions of dollars to keep Assad in power. So we should clarify Turkey's position. So on the one hand, okay, Iran is our neighbor. We want to work with them. We buy gas. We want to have Iranians as our guests, as tourists, but Turkey denies Iranian attempt to dominate and achieve nuclear weapons. So that's clear. And what we have seen during the Karabakh War, remember last year, Turkey and Azerbaijan, when they were working together to end the occupation in Karabakh, 30-year occupation, Iran took sides with Armenia. So there is a clear line between Turkish position and Iranian position. And also, since we talk about Turkish-Israeli relations, we know that Turkey and Israel were at the same page during the Karabakh War. So maybe this can also one of the reasons why we talk about Turkish and Israeli approachment. Maybe there is an Azerbaijan factor or Azerbaijan leadership who try to mediate. We don't know that, but this is a possibility. So I think Israel obviously denies Iranian expansion in the region. So this is also another common position which is bringing Turkey and Israel together, contain Iran or counterbalance Iranian impact in the region, because both sides, and not only Turkey and Israel, but also Gulf countries, Saudi Arabia, UAE, and other Gulf Arab countries, they are also concerned about Iranian attitude. So I think this is also one of the factors in this reapproachment.
Well, there's an interesting thing there. Remember recently, former Israeli intelligence officers, head of intelligence, said, the Israeli opposition to JCPOA was actually one of their greatest mistakes. It basically, allowed the since Trump, pulled out of the agreement. After that, there were no serious controls on Iranian nuclear activities, and then they were able to, sort of increase their enriched uranium, and they got even closer to a nuclear bomb. But that's one thing that's interesting, and I agree with you that Turkey has been uncomfortable with sort of increased Iranian role in the region at certain, especially certain arenas. Turkey kind of competes with Iran, but at the same time cooperates. And the Azerbaijani angle is, you're correct, that Israel was actually supporting Azerbaijan at the time, and there is a relationship there, actually even a military relationship as far as I know. But I'm a bit more hesitant about Turkish-Israeli rapprochement vis-a-vis Iran. It's one of those things. Both countries' preference is less emboldened Iran in the region, but I'm not sure if they could actively cooperate, because Turkey's relationship with Iran, Turkey is very careful about that, and whenever US tries to pressure Iran, Turkey asks about the end game. What's the plan here? What's the end game? What are you trying to do? So it's a complex relationship, but you're right in terms of Azerbaijan and similar other regional issues, Syria, even Libya, maybe. There are regional conflict zones, tension zones that, by design or not, or mostly not by design, Turkey's interests happen to overlap with Israel, and they can potentially think about areas of cooperation. But that goes back to my initial point about, this is a new region emerging. Arab Spring, made sure that, the region understood, you have to be responsive to your people's demands, right? That's been one message from the Arab Spring. But at the same time, there have been serious conflicts and millions of refugees produced, and Turkey has borne the brunt of that. And the US is unwilling to do much in the region in the way of kind of shouldering the burdens. US wants to shift its focus to Asia. Russia is kind of preventing the US from doing that anytime soon. But there is a US administration less willing to play the role of a bigger brother, right, in the region. It doesn't want to, even like Biden administration hasn't even talked about the peace process. They haven't made much effort. They simply endorsed Abraham Accords under, it was done under Trump. The Accords agreements between some Gulf nations and Morocco, between Israel and them, normalizing relations. But so that regional context, I believe that, is creating a situation where everybody has to talk to each other. And I think all these leaders are recognizing that reality, including, MBZ of UAE, MBS of Saudi Arabia, Naftali Bennett in Israel. So these leaders have to, they're recognizing they need to talk to each other, and I think that's an important sort of motivator for Turkish-Israeli rapprochement. But again, as you know, like you never know with these things. It may not happen. Things might, fall by the wayside, and things can all of a sudden change. But there are important sort of drivers of this process, and it's not unreasonable for Turkey and Israel to start talking about increasing their cooperation in some areas at least.
Yeah, maybe both sides shouldn't have high expectations. Starting a dialogue is a step, is an important step. Upgrading relations, maybe looking for future, starting dialogue between leaders. These are, I think, enough at the moment. I mean, if they can move forward, it's good. But I think Palestinian issue, status of Jerusalem, will always be a challenge for the relations between Turkey and Israel. So Israelis, I think, should find a way to manage the situation if they cannot reach peace. I'm not very optimistic about it, but at least they should be careful when they take steps in and around Jerusalem, in holy places, in Al-Aqsa Mosque. These are very sensitive for not for Turkey only, but for the whole Muslim world. So when they change the place of a stone, it's a big incident for the Muslim world, even for the Christian world. I think they should find a way to, keep things under control. And also rights of Palestinians is always important. As you have mentioned, any escalation in and around Gaza can be a problem for Turkey. But as I believe, as you have also said, I think the expectations should be at a certain level. I don't know what you think about it.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was trying to express, that, if you keep the expectations low, and if it, becomes better than expected, then, you've achieved something. But there is a lot of history. There's a lot of room for cooperation, but there's also a lot of reasons to be somewhat cautious. It's not an either-or situation between any country in the region right now. There is no, block. It's not the Cold War like in Europe. It was NATO versus Warsaw Pact. You see that Turkey is having to stand up to Russia in some areas, Libya, Syria, etc. But then it cooperates with Russia on many issues, and I think it has to be this way, especially these days when the countries don't have to play it either or, So there's definitely areas of cooperation. Especially you mentioned Jerusalem. Let me say a word, because I edited a book after President Trump announced that U.S. would now recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, and Netanyahu was at the time the prime minister. And Turkey was really at the forefront of countering that and mobilizing the Islamic world. Erdogan made really strong speeches about this. You're absolutely right that, if we go back to stuff like that, those will always play as spoilers and will harm the bilateral relations and national interests of these countries as well.
Yeah, I think that's it for this edition this week. We talked about Turkish-Israeli relationship. Let's see what will happen, and let's analyze if this meeting happens. After that, we are going to talk about Turkish-Israeli relations. Again, thank you, Kadir.
Thank you, Bora. Great discussion. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. That's it for this week. So hope you see you next week and have a nice time.